Hey YouTube, what is good? So in this week's video, I'll be taking you with me during the retouching of this shot I've had with Laura. If you haven't checked out how we created this shot, feel free to go and check the link in the upper right corner, and let's roll that intro. So first things first, the first thing I always do is open up the image in Capture One where it is shot tethered, and then I just duplicate the background layer because we want to work non-destructive. And the first things I do is just use the normal healing brush, not the normal one, but the spot healing brush, which automatically calculates what there has to be replaced. So I just go through the image, I scroll through the image by holding down the space bar, and then I just scrub through the entire image and remove all the things that bug me. Little imperfections, let's say everything that would not be there in the following 2 weeks will be removed. Now I opened up the first image I retouched because I needed the flowers from the other floor I already created. So one of the things I did is I composite all the roses together into one floor panel with roses, so that I would just have to mask out the model in this case. So you can see me adjusting, resizing, scaling. You can see it's an entire group of layers which have already been stacked before. So what you do is you just take an image from the roses alone. Since we didn't have enough, we used them twice. So we put them first around Laura, and then we put them behind Laura a second time. I put my focus on Laura. Then I switched my lens into manual mode and I asked Laura to move away from the set so I would only have the flowers alone. Later on, I put all those layers with the same white balance, the same settings, the same lighting on top of the initial image. And with that, I put layer masks and start masking it out. Here you can see me using the select subject tool to make a quick selection around Laura, just to make a mask so that I have a mask and I can use it in this case to make sure that the roses do not overlap her. So I switched, you can see that layer mask, I'm removing it now. And by removing it, I'm filling it back up. So with holding down the Alt backspace, you can fill it with foreground, background color. And then it's just a matter of making sure that all the layers are composite in the right way, so that when you start doing these things, so now I'm replacing it by holding down the Alt key. So by replacing that layer mask, everything that is under it, like in red, you can see now what is selected. So I'm gonna paint manually the legs because there's no point in using the path tool or anything like that. I'm just coloring it in manually with just the normal brush. Pretty not really hard, but like 70-ish hardness. You can see me change it, and then I just color it in. I zoom in a lot, and then I just paint over the heels because that was the tricky part to get selected automatically. So I'm just painting it in slowly, taking my time, and then when it's painted in, I have a layer mask which I can use in the next steps of this retouching process. So making sure that I don't have any white backdrop selected, I go over it and make sure that everything is nicely colored in, just to be sure that we don't have any roses covering the model. This is like painting with white and black on the layer mask. White will in this case remove the layer mask or show the layer that's under it, and black will make sure that there's nothing visible that would have been there otherwise. So this is like when you're retouching this, it just takes some time, but it will be worth it in the end to just have taken your time. Otherwise you will be messing around all the time. Like here you can already see like I painted it in. Like if you hold down the shift key and you click on the layer mask, you disable the layer mask temporarily. And then you can see me adding the layers I already painted in a previous retouching session, and I'm just fiddling around, transforming them, painting them in, making sure that there is no issue with it. And if needed, I just paint with white and black. Here you can see me painting again because it was overlapping the shoe a bit. And then I just take a layer, I duplicate it again, and I just started. This is the initial layer. You can see only one layer by holding down the Alt key and just clicking on the little eye icon in front of it. And this is just, again, this is me playing around with the layers and with the roses on it, painting it in. Sometimes we get confused. We paint with white instead of black. So with holding down the X key on the keyboard, you can quickly change between the foreground and the background color. So in this case, between black and white. So it's always filling with white to show the mask, black to conceal the mask. So in this case, I make it black so I don't see it. And then with white, I start painting it in where I want roses to show up. So black conceals, white reveals. That's the thing I keep in my mind when doing this. And if like we have roses on the left side, we have roses on the right side. If we need to change them, we just reposition like I'm doing now, we just reposition the layer and then we put a black layer mask on top of it and start painting again with white in the areas we think we might need it. And if you want to reselect the area or the initial selection you've made, you just hold down the Control key or Command key on the Mac and click on the layer mask you had. In this case, from group 1, that layer mask I was using to make sure that I don't have to select the little triangle under her out again. So I'm moving it a bit, inverting the layer mask. Didn't work. And then I started just painting it in. There you go. So if you have an initial selection, you can always go back to the selection and copy it to other layers or use it at another layer, just the selection by the marching ants. And here I'm just copying, pasting. And the key is when painting these things in, use a soft brush, but when we are talking about edges, we want to make sure that we use we use a brush in regards of hardness, which mimics the initial hardness of the object you want to paint out or in. So here I'm playing around with the background, making sure that I don't have any lines. And like you can put a group in a group in a group in a group and put layer masks every time on top of it. So you can build it slowly up, and it is a non-destructive process. So you can always go back. I'm cropping the image now the way I want it to. Like this is before, after. Just viewing one layer is holding down the Alt key on your keyboard and clicking on the eye icon in front of a layer, and it shows up. To correct the background, I'm just using a blank layer and just sampling with holding down the Alt key once the brush is selected and just painting over it. And as you can see, I don't name the layers when I'm doing this because it would be too much. Rose 1, Rose 2, Rose 3. So I just go ahead and stay in that workflow. I'm grouping all the background layers into one so that I have everything in one group. If needed, I have the background or the floor again. This is the image I retouched, and now I'm gonna copy the colors which I already had in that image to this image. That's the good thing when you shoot images that are shot in the same light, in the same everything. You can just copy the toning you had already on one image. So here you can see we have a curves layer, we have a selective color layer, and we have a color balance. The curves layer is created to put a little bit more contrast in the image. So we drag the black point to the right and the white point to the left. The selective color really targets only the red, and the color balance just boosts the midtones a little bit more to the blue or red. Now I'm running my frequency separation action, which is based on a median. So frequency separation splits up the image into color and texture. And for this case, I'm just selecting on the low layer with the lasso tool with a feather of around 8, 9. And I just blur it out. So I select it and I do filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and I put an amount in that is enough to soften the skin. Or not soften, but like blend all the colors together. Now, keep in mind, if you're doing this, you can quickly remove all, how do we say it? All definition in the model. So you can have a 3D image. And by doing this, you can make it really flat. So keep that in mind. And once you have applied a filter, a way to reuse it is just pushing down the shortcut key Ctrl F, and it uses the filter you used last. So in this case, I'm just pushing down Ctrl F and I'm doing Gaussian blur from the radius I had over and over again. So it blends the transitions between colors this way. Sometimes this technique works, sometimes I use a mixer brush, sometimes I just use dodge and burn, no frequency separation. It really depends on the image and the vibe you want to go for. Now, I'm saving this image out, but it was a big image because we have all the layers with the roses in it. You build up the image, and on the bottom you can see how big it was already. So I will have a notification like it's asking to save for a large document format, which is a PSB instead of a PSD. And since I think 2 versions ago, Lightroom finally supports showing a PSB in Lightroom. Before it was not able, so you had to make a PSD with the notification like, hey, there is a bigger file, save it, and then you know when you were in the folder that when you open it up in Explorer, you can see where the initial retouched file was. So it takes a lot of time saving these files out because they are, I would think it was about 3 or 4 GB. In the final stage, I just merged all the roses together because there's no point in keeping them, but I wanted to keep it for the tutorial's sake. So saving it out, and I got a quick system, so yeah, it just takes time. I'm working on 2 SSD disks, 3070 graphical card, yeah, all the good stuff, 64 GB RAM. So it's just saving it out. Now I will jump to another segment after it's saved. I'm not gonna keep watching on the screen. So I'm jumping to another segment, and then we just started continuing on this retouch. So when we continue retouching this, one of the final steps was just like using the clone stamp on the texture layer, a hard brush, make sure that current layer is selected, and just paint over it. And I'm just fixing some texture that bugs me. And I'm still going over the color layer. So it's always a mixture of texture, color. You just play around with it, you just soften it. It's not really softening, it's more blending everything together. Again, you can do this with dodging and burning. You can do this with using the mixer brush. It really depends on what you prefer. Sometimes I like the mixer brush, sometimes I like this method. Again, personal preference. There's no right or wrong way. It depends on what you're going for. So now I'm running, I'm gonna do dodging and burning, but on a gray layer. So that means I just make a new layer, fill it with 50% gray, and change the blend mode to soft light. And here I'm gonna paint on the highlights and shadows that are already there. So by painting white, I make everything brighter. By painting black, I make everything darker. So if you know that, you can just emphasize the highlights and shadows that are already there. So I'm just painting, making the edges darker, making the mid parts, like the highlights, brighter. And with this, you can really make an image 3-dimensional. So this step takes a bit of time, and you can do it in multiple layers. You can see that I will create a new layer and a new layer and a new layer. And you can play with the opacity if it's too much, because we have the tendency to just go overboard with it. So we then dial it back to like 70, 50-ish%. And I'm doing this with a brush of like 1%. So it's really slow, or 10% is really hard. So you want to build this effect up. You don't want to start with a brush of 50% and just start painting like a crazy person. You just build it up. Like now I'm focusing on the face, and I'm gonna make a new one because each part should have a separate gray layer. This way you can control it better. So now I'm slightly, painting it in, and I come to the conclusion that I was painting with white, so I needed to change it to black. because we want to go around the eyes. And with white, we want to make another highlight brighter. So which again, take your time, just paint it slowly. And you should really try it on one of your own images, and you will see that it makes a lot of difference, this technique. You can do this with curves again. You can do this with blank layers and using the dodge and burn tools. I prefer in this case to use the gray layer because it just goes quicker. I mean, quicker. I don't have to change between layers. I can just use my X key to change between brighter and darker. The only problem with this technique is if you have color shifts in the image, because if we make things darker, we saturate things. If we make things brighter, we desaturate things. If we go too far, we have to fix that, and then it gets annoying because there's no layer mask or anything. So that's something to keep in mind. But for this case, I knew I didn't want to have any color shifts, so it was just fine. And you just move through the image. Don't stay too long on one image. Zoom in, zoom out. Really important to zoom in and out and just see what it says. That's the quickest way to get to the point you want to be. And here I'm blurring. So when you paint in, you can have like really hard transitions because you paint with a soft brush. But when you paint and the transitions are too hard, you can make a selection around it and just blur it out with Gaussian blur, because you're not blurring the image. Your initial difficult word. You are actually blurring the painting you've just put on there and not the skin or anything. Initially, that was the word I was looking for. So yeah, and then the toning, like I said, it's nothing too crazy. Here you can see me merge it, but it was a mistake. I wanted to use the Ctrl-Shift-Alt-E shortcuts, which merge everything together and keep the layer stack beneath it. Because I was gonna jump into liquify, I think. Might be wrong. Yeah, here we can see me enabling and disabling. Because with the toning, it really boosts the red and it gives the skin tones a little bit of a darker vibe. And here we go into liquify. The key with liquify is use a big brush. And I like to reduce the pressure a little bit so I don't make changes too quickly. Sometimes it's needed, but yeah. It is saving again, I can see. And then it are just like small changes. You don't want to change too much. But in this case, since it was a perfect image, I mean, like we wanted to go for a perfect doll kind of vibe, or at least that's what I wanted. I'm gonna try to mix everything as perfect as possible, but while it still remains Laura. So when you do this step, don't go overboard. Just do the things you think that needs to be done and make sure that you don't go overboard. Like here we had some shading issues, so I'm just pulling out a little bit to make it a little bit more rounder. But because we have two curves, if the one that is already perfect, we also pull the other one. So that's something to keep in mind. And then I'm gonna be using a layer mask to freeze one curve and pull with the forward warp tool the other one. So you can do a freeze mask and freezing a layer. Freezing, make sure that you cannot move that part of the image so that stays just perfectly fine. And here it is just a matter of like using a big brush, a small brush. Now it's a small brush to make sure that the mask is under the freeze mask, so that like when I now take a bigger brush and I pull everything to the right, it doesn't change the first rounded curve. Took the wrong tool. So as you can see, it happens. And it's just like messing around, playing, seeing if it works. If it doesn't work, you just undo it by pushing the Ctrl-Z shortcut. And if you want to see what you've done in the total image, you have on the right side, you have a preview button. You can just tab it on and off. And here is just like playing around with the face shape. because Laura didn't like her, the width of her face, so I was just playing around with it. That's one of the new cool things in Photoshop. You can use the face adjustments, and it goes really quick. It goes quicker than you just taking the brush, but sometimes it, like when a model is laying down, it doesn't know where the face is. It's just a mess. So in here I've applied the liquify, and at this stage I think we can almost call it a day. Yeah, I'm gonna go back in, and I see that the roses on the left side are a little bit lower than on the right side, and since we don't want to stretch them but really move them, I've put more pressure on the brush, and then I put everything to a straight line. And this, again, this is like, it's up to you to decide how far you want to take this step. In my opinion, I didn't do that much, just corrected some lines and that's it. Like if I hold down the Alt key now on the background layer, you can immediately tell the difference. And now I'm sharpening the image out. When I sharpen everything, I got an action made by myself. It's available in the web store, and it sharpens the image out by using linear light and I think overlay or soft light as gray layers. So I'm now painting in the eyes and all the things that I want to have a little bit more sharpness on them. So it's resized to 2048, and I'm using that for web resolutions. So, and then when that's done, I'm just saving it out as a JPEG, save for web, and that's it. Nothing more to it. So it's just a matter of, like making sure that when you're doing this, you take your time. I'm not sure how far we are in the movie now. Will be more than 10 minutes, I think. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this little segment. Let's call it a retouching video. If you got questions about everything I've done here, feel free to get in touch with me. Don't forget to hit that little like bell, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you when I see you. Ciao, ciao.